Happy New Year, Doreen.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, are you excited about 2020?
I am. 2019 was a big year and it was a great year, but I'm ready for new.
Okay, well, where are you in the world?
I'm in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, will you say that again?
Yeah, Portland, Oregon. I'm in Portland.
Okay, which I love. Another Northwest
Yeah.
woman.
Are you from the Northwest?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Where are you
Yes.
from?
Spokane, and I lived in Portland for 4 years, though. So I am, and then we have lots of family in Oregon. So we're over there all the time.
Wonderful.
Yes,
I lived my
great.
early life in Colfax, Washington, which is right near you.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding. Okay, that's really fun because that's a small town and that's the cutest little town.
Yeah.
Okay, well, tell us what you do for your work, Doreen.
For my work, I like to say that in my whole entire life, I feel like I was put on the earth to celebrate and call out the uniqueness of everything that breathes and blinks. And for my professional life, I do that as a psychologist and then as an author and a speaker. And so in my private practice, I have just a very general practice where I get to work with incredible people who are trying to, overcome maybe things that have been painful or difficult and live healthy lives. And then in my speaking and writing life, I do that right now specifically around my research around how technology is shaping us and how we might become moderate in our use.
Well, and as you know, we're in our Healthy Way series, and this has to be talked about when we talk about becoming a whole person, right? So we're looking to get healthy in lots of ways, physically, emotionally, um, mentally. This is critical that we look at and we actually engage with this idea of kind of taming the digital beast because it is such a prevalent part of our lives. It's ubiquitous. It is. It has become that for all of us. I mean, we often point to our teenagers and say, well, we just wish that they would get off their phones. But the reality is that we are on our phones just as much and our screens, right? So not just phones, we're talking all screens. We're on our screens just as much as they are. So maybe can we just begin with what have you seen in your practice over maybe the last decade? How has this screen time changed really how we're operating as people?
Yeah, I love that question. And it's a complex one. And one of the things that I'm really trying to stress, especially with parents right now, is that there are no easy answers. We wish for them. And I think that's why we are at risk of saying it's their issue. There's some fantastic research that exists out there that shows that 95% of adults believe that there are probably some issues with the way in which we're using technology and with what is presented to us with our tech. However, something like 92% believe it's a problem for someone else. Uh, and so we have a really hard time, and especially when it comes to our precious, beloved children. We want to think that, yeah, there are pitfalls and difficulties, but that's probably happening at somebody else's house, not our home.
Yeah.
And so I think the first thing I would want to say is that this has become a very complex and universal issue, and that this isn't an issue of us being good or bad people or our kids being good or bad. It's far more complex than that, and there is no all or none with it. It's kind of necessary for our functioning, and yet it also is inherently not benign. And the way that the research shows that it is impacting us, coming back to your question, is fourfold. So the first finding is really that we are really literally altering the way in which the brain is wired. The brain works on the principle of use it or lose it, or where the brain fires together, it wires together. And that means that when we stimulate the brain in a certain way, and especially if we do that in repetitive ways, we create deep neural pathways that reflect what we need in terms of the proclivities to handle that stimulation. And one of the things that we know now about technology is that it does not stimulate the region of the brain that's called the prefrontal cortex, that is the CEO of the brain. It's the part of the brain that's responsible for attuned communication, for focus, for being able to stop and start behaviors. It's the part of the brain that's responsible for self-control. And since technology misses that part of the brain, it means we are wiring the brain around it rather than through it. Meaning it's not just that we feel like we can't focus anymore, we literally have not wired the regions of the brain that are responsible for focus. So that's the first way. The second way,
Alex, are you just inside kind of like this,
Mhm.
this a little bit of alarm, an alarm is going off a little bit inside of me right now as I hear you talk about that one very thing, because it changes our capacity to think. And that
Absolutely.
really frightens me. I just have to say, like, these alarms are going off for me right now.
It changes our capacity not only to think, but the three things, if you take the research and really boil it down to its most potent essence, the things that we are now losing as a result of not having as robust wiring in that region are our ability to focus, our ability, and that's to focus on one thing at a time without, being drawn away, our ability to delay. So that means our ability to delay impulses or to delay needing to check a Google answer or check, or emotionally to delay. So we focus, delay, and then to regulate. We are really diminished in our capacity to regulate our bodies and our minds, our emotions and our words. I mean, we're just the dysregulation that results as a kind of a function of the way in which we use our devices and the way in which our devices are now created. They actually provide stimulation that dysregulates. So yes. It's hugely alarming.
Yeah.
And that's just one of the four areas.
Right. Okay. All right. Going on to number two.
So number two, the scaffolding upon which we build our relationships is just deeply, deeply altered and changed. There is no such thing as kind of moderated intimacy anymore where, I disclose something to you and find out if you're trustworthy. And then, I find out kind of how I feel with you. And then I use those two pieces of data to find out if I should, trust you more and disclose more. And now it's full disclosure at the click of a button, and it's full disclosure of a curated self rather than of the self that we genuinely are. And what I find after talking now with thousands of people doing this work and research is that it creates this kind of insecurity about, I know I can't present in my actual embodied life in the same way that I can in my digital life. And so who is it that my friends are actually connected to, and how can I navigate that? So and then there are lots of other ways in which relationships are changing. The thing that I often liken it to is that if I was going to run a race and my stomach was empty and it was growling, I could quickly just grab a bottle of water and down it. My stomach would stop growling and I would feel full. But around, for me, half a mile, I would realize I have no calories for this run. I have nothing of nutrient value that will give me what I need. And that's a little bit what I think social media and relationships online feel like. They feel like that water. They make us feel full. But when things get gritty and tough, we don't have the same capacity. So brains, relationships, and then our sense of self is deeply altered by the way we use screens. So the most robust and reliable research we have tells us that Americans over the age of 14 are spending 10.5 hours a day with screens. And that is troubling. And that's even an old statistic. The most reliable research we have is 2 years old. And the way we get to that is that most people, especially in America now, use 2 technologies at once, or sometimes 3. So if you're texting while you're watching a movie, or you're writing a paper and you're checking your, DMs for an hour, we have to put those hours side by side, the hour on the device and the hour on the phone and the hour on the screen, and that becomes 2 hours. When you think about that, we are getting so much of not only our feelings about ourselves from the outside of us, but also so much of our information. Our devices do our thinking for us. Mm-hmm. And this changes the way that we have a relationship with ourselves. And this, I think, is particularly important to think about when we think about our spiritual health, because the only way that we can connect with God is deeply within ourselves, and that informs, our relationship with ourselves informs the way we tell ourselves the truth about ourselves, the way we can connect with a God who is different than just the God we project God to be, and so this is profoundly alarming to me, is just this way in which we do not have, I talk about it as, rather than having an internal locus of control about ourselves where we go inside to determine how we're doing, how we're feeling, to regulate ourselves, we instead go outside to our devices for all of that. So it's this external locus of control which removes us from this depth that I believe we were created to have. And then the final way that tech is changing us is just we are living more and more of our experiences are outside of our bodies. So we're having this kind of disembodied experience rather than a very robust embodied life. And I no longer use the acronym in real life because I don't think there's a distinction between our quote unquote real life and our digital lives. The things we do in our digital spaces impact our embodied ones. And I find this to be true even in churches where we, put a lot of our experiences now on screens up front rather than having these kind of boring, quiet experiences that do force us back into our bodies. So those are the 4 ways.
I am curious, especially when you were talking about the second, the insecurity, and when I look at things online, then I have this sense of insecurity. Do you think people are aware of that and able to articulate that? Because the way that you articulated it indicated a lot of self-awareness there. But I think that maybe people don't realize that that's happening. Is there a way to kind of become more self-aware as we're going through that?
I think that is such a fantastic point. I was recently talking with somebody who has millions of followers, and I was saying, the way that now, especially youth culture, they look at that and they think, how can I get that? Because that's what will make me feel okay inside, and not just youth culture. I do it too, so there's the perpetuation that we must attend to that digital self, which also keeps us from being self-aware. And then there's also the reality that even when we're out and about with people or in solitude, we're interacting more with our phones. So that kills self-awareness as well. So I think the first thing is just to find some practical ways of talking about the issue and really creative ways of thinking and talking about it, because it's not a fun thing to think about. There's a lot of, I think, conviction that goes with becoming aware that maybe we have tended to our external digital selves more than our embodied, deeply spiritually thirsty selves. So we have to first think and talk about it. Then I think we have to do a really honest assessment. And if we can find ways of doing that that aren't shaming with even our kids and our families, just talking about, hey, where are the places that you feel really known? Or what are the things about you that no one knows because they're never going to be something you post about? And is that something that makes you light up and feel fiery and interesting? How can we help you engage that more? And then I think the third tool is just finding some small ways of interrupting the way in which we turn to our devices for relational kind of satisfaction. I think a lot about how I believe that we are created for relationship. That is what we are created for. And oftentimes, if we're, let's use the analogy of hunger again, if we're really, really hungry, we can just satisfy that quickly if there's a marshmallow on the counter and we can eat it quickly, and it kind of leaks off that feeling of hunger that would maybe motivate us to seek out something that is really nutritious and will really satisfy us. And it's the same with our devices. We are kind of leaking off and getting little bits of satisfaction rather than letting ourselves really sit with quiet and silence enough to be hungry, to figure out what we need for that real relational need to be met. So anything that can interrupt that, or things like I should have it with me, a little flat stone, I'll put it where I usually keep my phone. So when I reach for my phone, there's a little flat stone there. And that forces me or reminds me that, okay, I can take a little bit of time to just be present with myself. Or around my house, I have just bins and bowls of kinetic offerings that will, people without even thinking about it will set their phones down and pick up, a yo-yo and play with it, or a little hand puzzle or something. Anything that, again, forces them to just be with themselves rather than quickly in this world that is so shiny and tempting in which to kind of leak those needs off. Does that answer and address your question?
Yeah. And I think that's great. I'm just thinking about even in the car when I'm at a stoplight and reaching for my phone to check whatever, who knows? And it's that because I'm thinking, I don't know that it's really a kinesthetic thing for me. And then as you're talking about, wait, but what are all the moments when I actually am reaching, and the active grabbing when it's a place where I have to really work at it, I have to get it out of my purse, I become a little more conscious, and I can stop myself in those moments and say, no, I'm going to put my hand back on my steering wheel, and I'm just going to pray, or I'm going to think about how I feel right now, or I'm going to plan what's for dinner, anything other than
right.
Just that filling. It's just, you're right. The marshmallow is such a good example because I ate a lot of marshmallows yesterday. So I know that I can just keep eating the marshmallows and that it doesn't satisfy.
Yeah, and it's habitual, and that's part of what has happened for us. It's always, if you ask anyone who, for instance, has smoked, if it would be better to have never started smoking or to try to stop, they will tell you, never start. And we have all habituated very highly to our phones, especially. And so it's the matter of breaking a habit. And part of the habit, like you're talking about, is just this kind of reflexive thing we do now. But another part of it is going deeper and saying, how did this become my habit that at a red light, which I can relate to, we need to grab it? And the other thing that's so interesting to me that I'm always thinking about as a person who thinks about this topic a lot is, we're going to ask our kids when they are driving not to have their phone in their hand, but our kids are with us, seeing us grab our phone at the red light. It's just, and in their mind, there's no distinction. My brother did a brilliant thing I will share with you. And in the door, if you ride in his car, in the door pockets of every door in the car is a kazoo. And they do kazoo, name that tune.
Cute.
At red lights, or just, any time there's a tendency to grab the phone, they grab the kazoo. And I think that's a genius tactic.
So fun. And I was thinking about what a brilliant idea that is, that you have kinesthetic things all over your house. The other day I went to my friend's house and she has a 6-year-old, and he's just kind of he's a little bit boy wonder. And so they have like Rubik's cubes and bottle flipping things. And they have, they just have like, there's some stacking dice that are kind of like the Rubik's cube. Anyway, they had them all over, and literally within seconds, every kid in that room was playing with some kind of cube or, doing the cap to cap bottles or whatever. I mean, it was so great. And everyone was engaged.
And it happens with grown people as well. One of my favorite things at my house is to watch where people forget their phone. I have balance boards out and about, just in different places in the house that people can stand.
Wait, like literal balance boards on the floor.
I just, or you can make them with just a 2x4 and a piece of PVC tubing. And so I have them, tucked aside, but somebody takes them out inevitably. And I have baskets of kendamas and diabolos, which are the string with the sticks, and then smaller baskets with like shape blocks and kinetic sand. If every home had a bowl of kinetic sand, people would talk more, because you put a bowl of that stuff in your lap and suddenly you just and so and I find those things for grown people to be really, really, really helpful. And it can be hard for, especially for at-home parents who feel like, I see this stuff all the time, and when my kids aren't around, I don't want it out. But if a person who's going to try to have some time for me, contemplative prayer is it's the thing that sustains me and keeps me alive. But let's say meditation or whatever it is, to even just sit for 20 minutes and play with that sand to bring you to a place where you can then have a more meaningful time of silence and quiet and solitude. The book I'm working on right now is called Welcome to My Boredom Party. And I feel like it could, benefit the world if I could just invite everybody to a big, awkward boredom party and help us all realize that we can totally tolerate the awkwardness of not being stimulated, but we've forgotten. And so I think it feels it feels like a big ask. And then if you couple that big ask with the neurological reality that we face, which is we have not wired our brains in order to tolerate boredom, stillness, all the things related. And then you add the third dynamic that life doesn't hand us opportunities for boredom anymore. Laura Ingalls just had to be bored like a whole lot of the day, every day. And now, unless we genuinely value it, we commit to it, and we follow through on the commitment, we can avoid boredom for our entire lives. And that's actually the tool that creates the complexity of an authentic sense of self.
Mm-hmm. When I read Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, that really changed my thinking. That was kind of the beginning of my aha. I need to do things differently. And his big encouragement is, even when you're in the grocery line, interestingly, if you're at Costco and you're in the line and you're looking at every single person in line, they are all on their phones. And one of his suggestions was keep your phone down. And it has been remarkable, the kinds of things that I have discovered in the grocery line. Like, I'm helping people, I'm talking to someone, it's just interesting how it's kind of woken me up too, because I've been forcing myself not to get out my phone.
Right.
But those little changes, because, his point and your point is that when we force ourselves to do that, we actually grow that part of the brain that is more thoughtful, that is, in charge of that self-control, decision-making, right? So that grows that part of the brain. So I'm always like, I'm growing that part of my brain. That's why I can't get out my phone right now. But really, it takes a massive intentional act to do it.
Yes. It's true. And it also, and this is, I think, an issue for individuals who live with a lot of social anxiety, or maybe who even live with maybe autism or a mental health condition. Not only does it take hard work to be able to do that, but it takes a lot of self-soothing skills, because it feels so awkward. And that's where I think some people get stuck. They'll try it and they believe in it, and they understand that this is important to not be looking at our phones when we're out and about, but they literally don't have that internal kind of grit, to be able to tolerate it. And that's where I wish that we could all encourage each other. Like, I love you saying, I'm helping other people. That's so beautiful, because then you're inviting other people into this wonderful experience that exists when embodied people encounter each other.
Okay, so I have a question about what you just said. And again, not to harp on teenagers, because we all do it, but I have to say, one trend that I see that's so different is, you see the teenagers who are finding security in their phone, because somehow if they're busy on their phone at the moment, they don't have to feel awkward and alone. And so how do we get them to look up and to not feel like it's this, what I'm saying? It's like this safety for them, because if they don't have that, they don't feel okay just standing there.
And that's very much a reality. There's a huge trend right now nationally that therapists who work with adolescents are literally taking them out and about into the world and having them do things like order their coffee drink eye to eye, and then have to accidentally spill coins all over the floor, pick them up and then pay face to face, just to handle those kinds of awkward moments like you're talking about. I think the first thing that we can do is begin to model really, really well, and to pay attention to the ways that we are and are not modeling. Things like what I just said, ordering our food and drinks ahead of time and going to a separate counter to pick them up, rather, just even those, or, having our groceries delivered or everything, even those little opportunities to take our children and to say, we're all going to leave our phones in the car, and you're going to hate me for it, but I challenge you to find the coolest thing you can find in the store for $5 and then we're going to buy it, or, and then you have to tell me the 6 reasons it's cool, or I don't know, but to, kind of model this idea that we can do small things together. And then when we get back, we'll all binge on our phones for 5 minutes and then we're going to put them away again. Or, also to amp up our teaching, our literal teaching about self-soothing. So literally to name and call out, like at the red light would be a perfect example in the car, or when, when mom is driving and everyone else is on the phone, to say, like, we're going to do one ride where we're going to put the phone down and we're just going to say whatever is on our mind. Like, this is the most boring thing that has ever happened to me, or this is the most awkward thing. I hate this. I just want to look at my phone so much. I can't even tell you. But to begin this narration about why we reach for it, and then to begin to add in some alternatives. So one of the most amazing gifts people can give themselves right now, and as grown people, we can give this gift to the young people in our lives, is to give them the practical skills of self-soothing. So for instance, whenever I speak at a high school or a college, which are my favorite, I dedicate, no matter how short my time is, I dedicate 10 full minutes to teaching them a meditation practice, to doing a silent sit, 10 minutes. And teachers and administrators think, like, are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
But if you teach them, and in a humble, the first thing I do is get on my knees and ask for their forgiveness, that my generation has handed them this beautiful thing called technology, and then talked absolute smack about them for using it, all the while checking our own, feeds. But then I get in the real nitty gritty of saying, we're going to power off our phones. We're going to lay on the floor. I'm going to teach you how to fill the deepest part of your lungs with breath. And it's going to feel amazing. And I'm going to guide you through this experience, and you're going to be shocked at the end that it's 10 minutes. But after they've done that once, and usually they feel kind of like, oh, what just happened? I feel amazing. Then there's the little seed planted that we can help them, narrate when they're out in social, to be able to say in a loving, non-shaming way, honey, I see you on your phone. And I think that's because it would feel really awkward to look up and around. But I just want to remind you about those 3 deep breaths. Could we do 5 minutes with your phone in your pocket? Like, and getting buy-in in this gentle way. Does that address what you're asking
It
about?
totally does. And I'm thinking, so my husband's a physician, and he actually has been talking to me lately about how people will literally be on their phones during appointments. Like, he'll be examining a kid and he'll be on his phone while, it's just this weird thing. And as parents aren't, obviously that's an awkward situation. But as a mom, I think I would step in and be like, come on. But I think parents, for some reason, don't feel like they have, especially because it's a little bit difficult with teenagers sometimes.
Yeah.
They don't feel like they have the power or the prerogative to say, now is not the time. How do you coach parents on that?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think actually in talking with youth and young adults, they are desperate for it. They want the boundaries. Oftentimes, however, I think because parents feel unprepared or like they don't know how to do this, it comes out in this very authoritarian and shaming way, rather than it being something that we come alongside our children with and saying, this is an issue for me too, honey. This is, it is so much easier to look at my phone when I am doing something I don't want to have to do, like go to the doctor, or and I want to help you because it's going to help you in the long run be able to look up and into people's eyes, and to be able to have some skills where you can bring yourself kind of down in small increments of time to be able to tolerate. So I think it is about getting buy-in, and the research is also really clear about that without very intentional buy-in, we don't have much of a hope as parents in helping our kids moderate. And even if you look at most tech contracts, that if parents are going to use contracts with their kids, the contract is all about the things that the child will agree to. Rarely does it have something about my parents in this contract agree to not shame me. My parents agree to help me find things that will stimulate me. And this is the other big thing, that the other big elephant in the room that I haven't mentioned in relation to this, is that if we have set our child's life up in such a way that they don't have a diversity of people in their lives or experiences or things that are unique to who they are created to be. I'm a huge believer that there is that of God in every person. We are image bearers. And that of God in my child may look very different than what I've ever imagined a healthy person might be. But if we have set up our homes so that they're very narrow and very us-centric, our kids will find all the fieriness they want in online spaces. So we have to be willing, the thing I'm constantly saying to parents is that we have to be willing to be inconvenienced and uncomfortable. We have to have a variety of people in our homes and in our lives that our children can bump up against and kind of be both completely frustrated and embarrassed by and completely inspired and stimulated by. And so if we aren't offering buy-in and then also this kind of fiery life in our own homes, then we really are going to be less successful even at helping them self-soothe and engage the natural and embodied world.
That is a really, really cool way of phrasing that. I really like that. How have you done that in your own life, in your own home?
Yeah, so my family has been very committed. My children are now grown and launched and out of the house, but we practiced what we called radical hospitality. And that meant that I tend to be a connector, so I'm involved in a lot of civic things and, just in a lot of different spheres. But I just committed to them, to whatever kind of wild people they wanted to have around. We would host, and we would, there wasn't always going to be perfection for sure. A lot of times, we were, I don't know, eating whatever frozen vegetables and some broth in a soup that was maybe not that great around the table. But the focus was on creating a really large world, and then doing things that looked absolutely ridiculous. So for instance, when my kids would have sleepovers, I would say, you can watch a movie, and then at midnight we're going to leave all the phones at home, and my trunk is filled with sidewalk chalk, and I have all your teachers and administrators' addresses, and we're going to go sidewalk chalk their driveways and roads until the sun comes up, and then we're going to go out to breakfast at some all-night cafe, or
Cute.
Which, it took some buy-in, especially with the boys, but once we did that, then it was like we kind of had a house where people knew weird things were going to happen. And it was worth showing up just to see what weird thing would occur. And I think the more we can, but it's being uncomfortable, it's being inconvenienced, and then modeling, and along the way of modeling, kind of inviting people. So, we'd do things like ice blocking, which is you go get a block of ice at 7-Eleven or your convenience store, and you put a towel on the top of it, and you go to a park with hills after dark, and you slide down it. And so I would tell the kids, you don't have to do it, but I'm going to do it, and I'd like you to be there for me in case I break my neck. But you slide down a couple times, and suddenly everyone wants to try it, right? And so if we can set up this fiery embodied experience for our kids, I think there's much less of a risk of them, habituating to their most interesting life being online. But it's harder than ever to do that. And so I have immense empathy and, just immense empathy for parents, because the work is harder than ever. And especially as our screens are I'll use this word intentionally, infiltrating our schools and our places of learning and worship, that means the onus is even more on families and on parents to make sure that their homes are not driven by tech. And it's just hard. It's hard. That is one thing that I am very excited about the book, is I really worked hard to infuse it with lots of very practical ideas. So ideas like ice blocking and bigger, better games and all those kinds of things are just in the book. And the one other thing that I think parents can do is to think about their own way of being in the world. So I talk a lot about multiple intelligences. So, what lights you up as mom or as dad, and then what lights each of your children up, and being very specific, because so if your child is really into video games, it's probably because they love strategy. It's not because they want to go shoot people.
It's good. Yeah.
So what are the things that engage that strategic part of their mind that you can have that are embodied? Or if you're really into social media, probably because you're a people smart person, you're relational. So what are the things you can do within your embodied life that meet that need, that leave you away from, just feeding social media interests? So those kinds of things I think can be helpful as well.
It really speaks twofold to Krista's concern, I think, about connecting and how do we help our kids connect, but then also this idea of we're practicing being awkward. And so it's this practice of, okay, now I've done this uncomfortable thing, which means I know then how to be uncomfortable without my phone the next time I'm sitting in the gym watching a basketball game. I'm just thinking about the basketball game I was at last night and how many kids were sitting with their phones between them and the game they were watching. Like, hello, people, let's participate in the event that we are part of. Right. But it's that comfort. So you're giving them that chance to practice the uncomfortable. And on top of that, you're giving them the rich life offering that life can be interesting, and that it's not just a life of screens that's interesting, but our actual lives can be interesting. Right. I am thinking about parents being exhausted and this idea of we need to entertain our kids and we're by doing this. But I want to remind people too, what you said about boredom, and that sometimes it's just, we're going to turn things off and we're going to let our kids be bored. That doesn't mean we have to offer a really entertaining alternative. Yes. They can come up with alternatives. And if they don't, they can go to bed.
That's right.
And sleep is always good.
Yes.
So good. And boredom is actually, there's research that shows that boredom is correlated with creativity. And so when we aren't offering our kids the opportunity to kind of have creative invention, and I am not a believer in us having to entertain our kids, I'm kind of this supporter of saying everybody gets to develop their own unique sense of entertainment. And we can provide the tools. We can have the tools out and about. And something you said really sparked another thing that I'm also really wanting to help people think about, because I find that education and information is really empowering. And so if we can ourselves as grown people understand and then help our children understand this idea, and that is that we are really being manipulated by tech. Technology, the devices that we hold and the apps that we use were not, most of them, a huge majority of them were not developed by human development experts for us to become more healthy, whole people. They are a business, and they exist to make money. And especially now in the world that we live in, technology is being created in such a way that our tech developers want us to experience the world like this. Sports stadiums now are investing billions of dollars in facial recognition software that exists all through the stadium so they can capture our attention on screens or put things in the right places. Stores now, there are huge lawsuits because last year in the holiday season, 2 of our largest retailers in the US made it such that when you downloaded their app, you gave them passive consent to follow your GPS location, whether or not the app was turned on in the store. And then they had microphones in their mannequins and facial recognition software in the mannequins. So AI could kind of track where you were and hear you, because they could also access your microphone. You gave passive consent to that. And then they could push you coupons based on where you lingered in the store and what you were looking at. We have another major chain that is.
Oh my gosh.
This is a major chain.
I'm just kind of dying right now.
There's a major chain that is rolling out in 2020. It's a convenience store chain, and basically the doors on the cooler section, where you open it up to get your drink, will no longer be just opaque, showing you what's in them. They're actually screens, and they will use facial recognition and height recognition tools so if it's a small person with a happy face, the screen will show things like the sugary drinks, and if it's an adolescent person, it'll show the sports drinks and the energy drinks. This is very real. And so if we can know that ourselves and kind of be informing ourselves, oh yeah, every click and everything I do here is making it literally is designed to make me want and need. It releases dopamine in the brain. It creates an addictive pattern. And it's wanting me to look at this at the red light. Then we can kind of go like, actually, I'm going to be different, exactly. Like, I'm not going to look because they want me to. And I find when I help young folks understand this, that empowers them in an entire new way. So one of the things I'm really encouraging families is to get your kids politically interested in this issue. They have immense power. They can write to their senators. They can, we have huge legislation issues that are coming up around privacy, especially for children. That's another way to get involved and another motivation to kind of take back my own personal power.
Yeah, and especially for teenagers who control is something that they're always pushing against, if they can understand how they're being controlled or the attempt at control by private enterprise. I would think that would be interesting. It certainly is for me. Like, my own personal reaction at hearing that is, well, I want to know what companies you're talking about, and I don't want to go there anymore. And whose app do I have on my phone? I mean, we experience that just on Facebook. We'll be talking about something and within 5 minutes, the Facebook ad that has never been on my screen before is up. And I swear it has to do with the microphone picking it up. And
it does.
I mean, it
does.
But people that live in the tech world have told me that's not true. They can't because of privacy. I'm like, but what are the chances?
It is. The issue is that we all give away our privacy when we download and interact with these apps. Exactly. So yes, they're set up, but you have to go in and set that up, and none of us do that.
Right.
So, and one thing to know, I love how you said that, Alex, about, tech people tell me this is not true. One of the most potent statistics that I have found is that Waldorf schools in America are the only school districts and systems that do not integrate technology until high school, and then only very moderately, because they're really trying to think or teach critical thinking skills. And remember, if we're Googling the answer to everything, we're missing the prefrontal cortex and how to think deeply and critically. The highest number of Waldorf schools per capita exists in Silicon Valley, and that's where all of the tech developers are sending their kids to school, and they want their kids in schools without tech. And I think
that is so interesting.
Is profoundly troubling to me, because it's also, Waldorf schools are very expensive. So we're also creating this opportunity gap. Those who do not have financial means are also going to maybe be the families who don't know how terribly toxic these devices can be, and so it's just more evidence that moderation is really, really important. Because I'm not talking about throwing your devices away. We have to teach our kids digital literacy and how to use them well, and we need to learn how to moderate our use and use it well. But moderation is really hard.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit more to this concept? So, okay, I'm going to rephrase that. Just yesterday, I had a friend who I saw her name pop up on my phone, and I thought, this is not a normal time of day for her to be calling me. She hasn't talked to me on the phone in a long time. So I intentionally answered because I knew something was going on. And sure enough, and she said this to me, she said, I needed a real voice. Mm-hmm. I needed to not text you. I needed to not Vox you. I needed a real voice. And I needed a person that I could share this with. And she was really upset about something. And it just reminded me that yes, we can use these things for connection. Like we can text people, we can, use Marco Polo or Voxer or whatever, right? And connect, but that it doesn't replace that human to human I hear your voice and I'm responding in real time. So what are some ways that we can intentionally choose healthier modes of relationship when when we're so used to doing the quick and easy?
Yeah. So again, I would come back to that mantra of, am I willing to be inconvenienced and uncomfortable? And then, am I willing to invite others into those two experiences with me? So one of the things that we can each do is to say to a few people in our lives, if we have the capacity to do this, to be able to say, I am a person that you can call, and I will do my best to answer. I may only have 3 minutes, and I will tell you, but I do want, I want to work at us being able to be connected in a more robust, embodied way. One of the things you're talking about is one of the things that the tech world will tell you is one of the greatest achievements of technology is that it has made us fantastic at being asynchronous communicators, meaning we're great at having little bits of communication with lots of people, but never really completing the conversation. I would not put that in the positive category. So anything we can do that will bump up that. The other thing that I think we can do is we can invite people into spaces that provide them with some handholds for how to engage each other in embodied ways. Because I do think, we just have some anxiety or we're not emotionally comfortable with that. And so that's where we can literally pay attention to the places and spaces where we encounter other people. That's why I know that you are both people of faith, and that's why I would encourage churches to kind of do away with their screens some of the time and have us be, doing these embodied encounters there where silence could maybe exist in community. We can do things like honor a few seconds of just being quiet together without even, we don't even need to maybe pray or whatever. We just being, so anything that just encourages us to get past that initial awkwardness and find out that we can live through it, that creates a new capacity for doing it again. And then we can do it again, and we can do it for longer and more. I hope that addresses what you were asking.
Yeah, that's great. And I was even thinking as you were talking, just how like cooking together, like that's an embodied exercise, but then you're building that relationship, but you're doing something together, or going on walks where you're in nature and you're doing, I'm constantly trying to think of like, what are some of those things that we can do with our bodies that also is relational, and so we're kind of building blocks on both levels.
Yes. And I would even say, encouraging the embodiment of the people that you encounter that you don't know. Things like if you're eating alone at a restaurant, not looking at your phone and actually encountering your server and maybe leaving them a little note on the napkin, or I oftentimes will leave a little note for the dishwasher. Thank you for washing this dish and may your day be beautiful, or anything that you can do that actually feeds that beyond even the people that you already know and are somewhat comfortable with is a beautiful thing. Like what you do in line at the store.
I love this conversation so much, Doreen. And I actually feel like I just want to sit here and soak up everything you have to say. So I'm so happy that you're writing a book because I want more. So when is the book coming out?
Well, the book that I was talking about that's filled with ideas is already out and it exists in the world. It's called Deviced, Balancing Life and Technology in a Digital World. And there are also on my website, there are lots and lots of videos that are just free and available to people of lectures and talks. And then the next book will be, who knows, the publishing process, as you know, Alex, is quite the process. But I have a blog on Psychology Today where I put a lot of my information on boredom. And so for little tips and tools, people can find that again on my website.
Sounds great, Doreen. Well, thank you so much. This has been an incredibly valuable conversation. I think we're all a little uncomfortable right now because what you said makes us uncomfortable because we know guilty, guilty, guilty. So I think it's just a matter of us sitting in that discomfort and letting us, like, it's okay to feel that discomfort. And now with that, then we can move forward.
Well, and if I could say one other thing, there is research that shows that 10 minutes a day of mindfulness meditation, it could also be contemplative prayer, but 10 minutes a day of basically boredom, or doing something like that actually doubles the gray matter in the prefrontal cortex. And now we have some new research that shows that it also increases the myelinization. So that means we can impact the power and the efficiency of the brain by just doing this 10 minutes a day. And so there are also some contemplative prayer and meditation exercises on my website that are 10 minutes that I would encourage people to just maybe give a try, give a whirl, and then see if they can begin doing it themselves where they don't need their device to do it with. But that was just that would be one quick tool that can have a huge impact.
Great.
Thank you, Doreen. So practical, so helpful.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, Happy New Year, and here's to health in 2020.